7:35 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, June 15th, 2022 years from an undetermined point in time. It is a hot day, and it's going to be a really hot day today in west central Michigan. It should be in the high 90s today. It's going to be a hot one. And I thought it was hot the last couple of days. Yesterday it was in the low 90s in the afternoon. That was hot. Monday, boy, it sure felt like it hit 90, especially in the sun. So look, I'm picking up on this Indiana thing, but not for nostalgia's sake. Not because I grew up in Indiana, not specifically because I grew up in Couts, but I'm hoping that this serves some illustrations. Maybe. I hope. This is my plan. Now, a lot of this, in my mind, weaves together a lot of the information that I cover. And I know it seems pretty broad spectrum, but in my mind it is not, because like the landscape itself, or like the earth itself, it all weaves together like a tapestry. So, first thing, I have thought for a long time that anything that claims to be art is pointless and useless if it isn't reflecting a far deeper reality. So, well, let me clarify. Especially fantasy, which most of the more popular film and literature today, fantasy. Far more novels are sold than nonfiction and technical books, I'm sure. And far more Marvel movies are watched than movies that, let's just say, they purport to be historical portrayals, especially the ones that purport to be very accurate historical portrayals, okay? What I'm saying is this, that if it's not telling us something meaningful about actual life, actual reality, not the fake reality that most people live and function in mentally, the real reality that we actually live and function in physically. Because that's the real reality. Most people don't actually live and function in that. Not in their minds. They have to in their bodies. And a lot of the people that can't, they end up becoming shut-ins, or they live such a very tight, limited existence because they don't know how to cope with what the world actually is, how the world actually works. Because all they've been taught from the earliest age through every vehicle imaginable, television, movies, literature, news, media, public education, etc. Politics, it's all teaching them fantasy. It's not reality. So, any art that does not somehow reflect a profound truth that can be learned from and that can be applied to trying to figure out the way that the world really works. Any art that doesn't do that, any art that's purely form, whether it's emotional form or physical form, and that's it, or is just reflecting an emotion, in my eyes, is garbage. Absolute garbage. I don't care how beautiful it is in form. Many things can be beautiful in form, and that makes it pleasant to look at, or maybe pleasant to feel. But if that's all there is to it, well, then I guess it's a design feature, not art. Now, the reason I say this is because there's been a lot of speculation about what art exists that might be allegory, or it might be heavily symbolic. I've tried to do searches on any sort of books that can help to explain a little bit regarding what artists are trying to say, any real artists, with either their paintings, their literature, or now today, more than ever, their films or music, any of these art forms. And they're hard to find. These books they're pretty tough to find. And I would imagine which ones exist are probably deliberately misleading. I know that those couple of books that Dan Brown did, of course, turning all of this into more mythology and probably misleading people more than anything, gave people this idea that, at least in the works of Da Vinci, that my camera's shaking around. If I can maybe stop that. I don't know if I can. That there was a certain amount of symbolism that he was padding into it. And of course, in his story, he wants it to all lead to his end. And again, I would think misleading. There are other books that have been made into films that are a little more fringe. And I have wondered a number of times how allegorical they might be. I'm familiar with the book. I read the first book in this series that was a very long time ago. I've seen the film and the miniseries, and I just started watching the newest film adaptation of this. And I've wondered, because a lot of people have speculated a lot on it, how allegorical Dune is, and in what ways. Because Dune deals very heavily in politics, political intrigue, which is useful if the author, Frank Herbert, had very intimate, special knowledge of the way factions in reality work. And he was writing this as an allegory, because there's no author today, no matter what their lineage is, therefore how easily they can get into a business that's very influential. All of these art businesses are very influential, and it's not that easy for just anyone to get into them and make a good living at it. So no matter who they are, in or outs, no one's going to come along and write a book that explains to you the way things really work, even if they did it without really naming any names. That, at best, that work is going to be utterly suppressed. At worst, that author might have a very short career and lifespan. I think that's such common sense, too, that they started many decades ago using that sort of a known reality. People who actually did a lot of work looking into these things many decades ago understood that pretty well, to where they started, in my opinion, using that as a sort of an optics tool, making it look like certain authors who were writing things that weren't absolutely correct being disappeared. They've been using optics like that for some time now. But what's interesting about Herbert and Dune is that he has one scene, it's early in the movie, where this Reverend Mother of the Bene Gesserits, interesting name, she comes to see this Paul Atreides because he's the son of a woman who's also a Bene Gesserit, and he's also the son of this Leto Atreides, part of a very powerful clan in this galactic sort of universe that he creates. Again, this is why, if this is just him creating a galactic universe out of his own imagination for people to spend endless hours of their lives, if you're creating this stuff for people to literally just spin their wheels for endless hours trying to understand this thing that you made up and the characters and keep track of them and everything else, it's shit. It is shit. It's less than worthless, because you are sucking away people's lives. That's why I think it's shit and it's worthless. If it's not giving something of value back, it's worthless. The best you can say it's good for is if your mind, you need to wind down your mind from a day that's way too tense, by the way, in this world, because this world is created to make us absolutely tense and exhausted by the end of the day. And we don't got time, oftentimes, to even think about anything else because our slave jobs are that fucking tense. So the only plus I could see in some of this stuff that has no other substance to it is just as a mind wind down, you know? And I will use some of it like that. Oftentimes, many days, I'll put in something that, you know, at the end of the day that I know will just basically let me not think anymore. Okay. But then basically, if that's its greatest use, and I believe it is, then it's right at the level of like Xanax, pretty much, or alcohol, whatever it is that other things people use for that sort of thing. So this scene, this Bene Gesserit comes to see this Paul, and here's the interesting thing about the scene: she has a box. She's in complete control of the situation. Paul, he's this prince, and he's not in control of the situation. She is, because they're that powerful. He doesn't realize this either. And she has a box. She commands him to put his hand in the box. When he does, as he does, she takes this long, very sharp dart, and she holds it right to his neck, and it's covered with poison. If she should inject this dart into his skin, it's supposed to be like instant death poison, that potent, the poison, okay? So she's holding death at his throat. She tells him to his hand in the box. When he asks what's in the box, she tells him, pain. Now, I don't remember if this was in the book or not, but in the most recent movie that they've made, which they have certainly turned House Atreides from being a very Anglo-Saxon-looking clan back in, say, just the David Lynch movies or even the miniseries, it's become a little more diverse-looking than it was. Anyways. She says that a dog caught in a trap will chew its own leg off to get free of the trap. That's what I've heard. But stay with me. I actually had a couple of dogs that would just dig the trap up. They would dig the down where the chain was. They would dig the stem up and pull at it until they could get it up, and then they would come home with the trap still on them. We'd have to take the trap off. But that's what I've heard. Maybe wild animals more than domestic dogs do this. Okay? So that's what she says. The whole purpose of this is to find out if he is a person of substance. That's the whole point to this. If he can keep his hand in that box and endure that pain. Now, in different versions, they describe what the pain is like. And it's supposed to be a terrible, horrible pain. In the David Lynch version, he can see, in a sense, see in the box. And he has to watch his hand cook and the skin fall away from his hand while he's experiencing the pain of it. The whole point is he going to be like a beast? And a beast operates on instinct. Or is he a higher form of life in their eyes, and does he deserve to live? That's kind of the bottom line. Now, it's interesting. There's something to that. And there's something that demonstrates the way that the people who run this world think. And the way they look at us. The way they look at most people who aren't them. Now, there is a great perversity in this, in that the same people who blind us stand over us with all advantages and berate us for our blindness. So there is a real twisted logic in the way that they think. But this is very much, in my estimation, based on the way that I see the world and the way these people at the top behave. This is exactly how they think. Are you going to behave like a beast? And they really do provide us with every possible vehicle that we would need if we were going to take the route of bestial creatures who operate just on instinct. They tailor-make very false narratives, specifically for us to operate on instinct, in a very shallow and superficial way. This whole narrative of Tartaria, Mudflood, Reset, that sort of alt history, so much of it is geared towards people who are just operating more on base instinct than reasoned thought and coming to conclusions that are hard gained. Conclusions that take a lot of work to get to. This is one of the reasons that it's rare that I will introduce evidence of various things, as this is very much what I believe happened. And it's very rare that I will actually say this is exactly what happened. So rare, I can't remember the last time I did. even in bringing it together, I present most of that information as in here is evidence of things. They are not absolutes. It is a theory. It is a number of theories. Because at this point, I don't think anyone can really present what is. But that doesn't seem to stop most of the leading figures in this whole alt history debacle from presenting that very thing. This is what had to have been. This is what had to have happened. And we see it over and over and over and over. My God, John Levi's last video on where he's now creating the typical optical schism that is necessary in these kind of movements when they're getting ready to put back to bed something. They create these optical schisms, and he's fueling it by starting out by criticizing Ewer Annan, and then goes into some canal stuff. But when he's criticizing him saying that he's telling people in his latest series where he flip-flops what to think. And he says, well, I would never tell people what to think. And then he went on to tell us what to think about a number of things about a dozen times after that in the course of only a 30-something minute video. And I didn't see one comment below that video that caught him up and said, wait a second, you're telling us that you don't tell people what to think, but you've told us what to think multiple times throughout this video and every one of your videos, John. Not one comment. So, I don't agree with the way that the people running Earth right now think and act, and the way they go about the warfare they're waging, because they're always waging warfare. Don't ever think they're not. Constantly waging war. I don't agree with the way they do it. But I do understand some of the reasons that they think and act the ways that they think and act. I understand why they look at most people as animals. I'm not justifying it. I'm saying I believe I understand why. But in a lot of ways, I find them just as deluded as a lot of other people. Because again, the only way for them to gain that upper hand is that they have to blind us in the first place. But I'm sure they have some sort of reasons and justifications for why they have to do that. Everybody does. No one's the bad guy in their own story. Everyone's the hero of their own story. Everybody's got a good reason for doing what they're doing. That's why morality can never be subjective. Law can never be subjective, and the law can never be done away with. Because if the law is done away with and all we have is what we have is grace now, who's to say what's right or wrong? Who's to say who's right or wrong? Especially if you want to follow Romans 13 very closely. You'll say, well, the big man at the top with the sword, he's God's agent. Now, that was a long caveat. Tough shit. The thing is, I'm oftentimes shocked that more people don't expect far more caveat from all these people out there that are pretending to give us any kind of insight on anything. On anything! We're too far misled not to. So, I do that because here's why. Like anybody else who is in a specific, why did I just say specific? Specialized, because it was going to sound weird, specific specialized field. And most of you know my specific specialized field, what I've been working in, biblical languages, i.e. Hebrew without the Masorah, Obri, along with geographical questions and historical questions. And I also deal in doctrine too, because really, what is doctrine? Doctrine is what it's saying and how it could or should apply to us. Okay? But that's my specialty. And the thing is, for months, I'm working on tools. I'm literally working on tools. It seems like mostly all I work on is these tools, because if you go into any kind of work, and it doesn't matter what any of you out there do, it doesn't matter if you're a plumber, or if you're a barista, or if you're a computer repair specialist or IP, doesn't matter. You have to use tools in order to accomplish your job. I don't care who you are. You have to, I don't care if you're a housekeeper. You have to use tools to accomplish your work. And if you see work that needs to be done, and the tools don't exist, the proper tools don't exist, you have to create them. I've had to do that as a carpenter. I've had to create, and a lot of carpenters know this is just a fact. You have to create tools oftentimes to accomplish a job, let's say in a meaningful amount of time, and to keep it consistent. You have to have the proper tools. So that's mostly what I've been spending time doing. So, look, when I look at a map, well, actually, I'm looking at Google Earth right now, but I did have Google Maps up. Sometimes Google Maps actually moves faster than Google Earth. When I look at a map like this, and as I pointed out last time, I was talking about the little so-called creek that ran by the old house that I once lived in. And just as a refresher, this is it right on the screen. I'm going to put this on the path tool so I can just draw a path here, and you'll see it. And yeah, that's a mile stretch in a perfectly straight line, straight up that way, straight up, straight up, straight up. And we can do this all the way to pretty much Westville. These very long runs, straight runs, that is absolutely not how water behaves. That is not how water behaves. I don't care if it's over very flat land. And Indiana, once you get south of Valparaiso, which is somewhat near Lake Michigan, it's pretty flat. You look at these green areas here. This is how water behaves. This is over very flat land. That's how water behaves. You pull way back, and you go to some of the more major rivers in Indiana, like the Tippecanoe or the Wabash. You can see how water behaves. Look, you see these dark green? See all that dark green in there? That's how water behaves. That's how water behaves over land. Now, I will give you, the further south you go, the greater variance in topography that you have in Indiana. Not that much. I mean, you do start getting, more wavy south of Indianapolis, but I'm sorry, this is the Great Plains, baby, okay? And you still have plenty of rivers that are going to behave in some crazy ways. There is not a state anywhere near me that is flatter than Illinois. It's very boring. No offense, you Illinoisers out there, whatsoever. But again, look, this is over very flat ground, a lot of this, and you will still see, even if you have to go in close, the way that rivers behave. You could take any sort of incline of Earth. And now consider, most of our Earth is not going to be heavily compacted. It's not. Pieces of ground that people say it's flat land. Yeah, it's flat as if you stand back and you look over to the horizon, it looks pretty flat, especially if it doesn't have a lot of trees. I mean, Indiana doesn't look like that because Indiana has plenty of trees. But it is part of the Great Plains. It is quite flat. Sort of. But here's the thing. So, any place that you even want to call flat, it's not really that flat. Like topographically, it's not really that flat. If you go and take a little walk through an area that when you stand back, it looks very flat, very flat. Get up close, take a little walk through there, and you'll find, whoa, the land is actually not so flat. It's kind of uneven. It can be kind of uneven. This is why they have to go out to the salt flats to do those speed tests, because that's actually flat. But even land that they try to say is flat, like the Great Plains, Plain States, Kansas, Illinois, Nebraska, even these parts of Indiana, they're not that flat. And here's the point. Water. You could take Earth and build up Earth, and build yourself a pile of Earth, and compact that Earth pretty good. And this Earth's not packed, this topsoil around most of these states. But still, you could compact it pretty good. If you want to go through that kind of trouble, which it is a lot of trouble to compact that Earth good, okay. And then take a hose or a large amount of water and start a stream at the top of that. Not a big one, not a real forceful, powerful one, but a small one that might represent the way a river let loose is going to find its path over land. And even on that large incline, let's say you build up something, it's, 6 foot total height from the ground, and give it like, your general water runoff concrete pitch. Like 1/4 inch a foot. Give it a pitch like that. I mean, that's a hell of a pitch. By the way, you ought to give it way less pitch than that because, relatively flat land, depending on what the official sea level elevation is. This is going to be way less than that. So that actually is going to mean that the water is going to not be so prone to pushing its way through to a straighter channel. The flatter you get, and this is why near a delta you'll see a river just going kind of crazy. The flatter you get, the more a river's prone to just... Water finds the path of least resistance. But even on an incline that I'm talking about, it's not like a super pitch that I'm talking there, like, your typical concrete pitch. That water's still going to, believe it or not, it's still not going to find a straight path. It's going to go around things because there's still going to be those minute granules of stone, clay, harder bits, softer bits. And water's got this way, it's going to find its path of least resistance. And you're going to get a channel like this because that's how water works over land. But take a place like Couts. Now, Couts officially only has less than 2 square miles of everything that's considered like the town of Couts proper. And I'm actually just going to pick the circle tool, go from this, didn't want to move, go from the center. We'll say, and I've got it on feet, back to miles. Well, that's the radius. Oh. All right, 21 square miles. I just pulled that. Well, things get tricky up in here. Part of the way to Malden, part of the way to La Crosse. I'll just keep it in here. So about 21 or so square miles, that circle radius. When you consider how many channels are just within 21 something square miles in this little teeny town of Kouts that are just straight as a board, some of them rather large channels. Really, some of them very large channels. Some of them called creeks, a number of them honest and called ditches. Because I guess technically, yeah, a ditch, that's something that's dug. Something that's dug, drainage ditch, any ditch. And you have old ditches that are no longer even in use. They're dry ditches that are all over the place here. Okay? And the reason that I'm using the town I grew up in, because I'm so familiar with it, but I think any one of you could take the same town or city that you grew up in and start taking a closer look at it. You're going to find a lot of these same things. Maybe not absolutely the same, but a lot of similar things. Now, let's just for a second look at a little bit of the official story concerning Kouts, Indiana. Here we go. This Wikipedia is short and sweet. Kouts is a town in Pleasant Township, Porter County, in the U.S. state of Indiana. The population was 1,879 at the 2010 census. Anyways, when I was growing up there were far less than 1,000 people in that town. My graduating class was 42. 42. Couple hundred students altogether in the school. Had to be less than 1,000 people even when I was living there. Small town. Families oftentimes farmed large areas of land and still weren't wealthy. The Heinolds were wealthy, but that's a whole nother story. Okay, so it says Bernhard Kautz, K-A-U-T-Z. These days, Kouts is spelled K-O-U-T-S. They change it all the time. Bernhard Kautz moved here from Pennsylvania. Maybe he's one of those Pennsylvania Dutch, huh? Before the arrival... Now listen, this is important. He moved here from Pennsylvania before the arrival of the railroads and established a farm where the town now sits. With the arrival of the Chicago and St. Louis Railway, two railways, in 1865. With the arrival of the Chicago and St. Louis Railway in 1865, Kouts and his brother-in-law, H.A. Wright, laid out the town. I guess they were qualified, and established a store. You don't just... All right. I mean, sure, you can decide where north and south is. They laid out the... All right. Known as Kouts Station, the town grew slowly until the Chicago and Erie Railroad intersected the line in Kouts. Soon, Kouts became a social and economic center of the township. And when they say township, that's not that huge either, honestly. I mean, there were a few like old schoolhouses, they call them. Different points, you know. Anyways, geography, according to the 2010 census, Kouts proper has a total area of 1.12 square miles. That's small. Yet the railroad was coming through. Think about it. The railroads that came through here, because they didn't even mention the others. Let's see. Chicago, St. Louis Railway. Right, and then there's the Erie Railroad and the Pennsylvania Railroad. Where do they mention that? They need to mention that. Why? Well, it actually mentions that in other pages concerning Kouts. there were a number of railroads that had come through Kouts. And here's the thing. From the time I was little, I was born in 1974. From my earliest memories, all the railroads were abandoned, closed down. The closest one I remember was one up in Malden. That closed down before long, too. Couple of things. First off, let's just say, just out of coincidence, that was a location that was along the line of these various, like a few railroads. And anyone who grew up in Kouts, who's been around that whole area, all around there, that big circle I drew, just in those 20-something square miles, knows that that whole landscape is absolutely littered with abandoned trestle bridges over creeks and rivers. It is littered with abandoned railroad tracks dividing fields, littered with them everywhere. These abandoned tracks everywhere. They're all over the place. So you have to think, even if a number of railroad tracks were actually coming through there in proximity, and there's a couple that we can absolutely establish tracks that went right through the middle of town. What would even have been in it for these railroad companies to stop there, as opposed to other places before or after that that would have offered either more passengers to pay fare, more product to pick up? Because if this was founded by this guy and his brother-in-law, how many people were even around there necessarily to bring product for, we have to have like some kind of an economic reason for the railroad to even establish a station and a stopping point there. That's one thing. If the story is as they say. The other thing is, why is it that at some point around 1865 and after, because I doubt all of those railroads came through at the same time, they would have went through the trouble of putting all these railroad tracks in, only to have abandoned them, and not just abandoned them, most of them are torn out. In many of these cases, the tracks are gone, the sleepers are gone, the stone, in a number of cases, is gone. What's been left is a shadow. As you can see here, I'll draw a path. This one sticks out like a sore thumb. And it's straight as an arrow. I mean, it is as straight as an arrow. So I'm starting just northwest of town. And I'm going to pull way back. Oh man, I just went through Clanricarde. Oh man, just crossed the Kankakee. And I'm down in North Judson. Now that's 14 miles as the crow flies, and that's way easier to get to than when you have to drive all of these roads that are mostly just east to west, north, south. Man, that's like straight as an arrow. But zoom way into North Judson, into the area where this track is. I'm going to clear this out. Ain't no railroad track there. Ain't no stone left there. What do you got? You basically got a mound that either they used to subdivide the land where the farmers farm, or it was too much of a trouble to remove. What? Just some dirt? I mean, hell. They said that they dredged the Kankakee River for like 100 miles around this time. They couldn't remove these hills so that they could more easily farm. That's 15 miles to North Judson. And it is abandoned, and we can see the lines that spur off in many directions from North Judson. And are there yet remaining railroad tracks? Nope. Most of the time, no. Really, as I said, you're only going to find a few little spots where you'll still find the coarse gravel and sleepers. A lot of times you won't find the rails on these, and these are huge stretches where you're going to see the same kind of topography. And you think, well, that's crazy. So I don't know the official story if they thought, well, that's just a good place for us to break all of these fields. Even though in a number of these situations, the same farmer, he's actually farming both sides. He's farming both sides. So he's obviously owns or is leasing the land, and probably leasing both sides of that land from the same owner. Now, did they only recently, and when we say recently, this has to be before the 70s, so it would put that, in use less than a century. But then we've got to figure how long it took them to build all of these railroad tracks, because they say that they built most of the railroad tracks in the United States from about the mid-1800s to the early 1900s. Which, first off, that story is beyond belief because of all the engineering aspects. Trains and canals, not like roads. Neither one of them are like roads, because trains are not like cars and boats are not like cars. Duh. But water doesn't behave like pavement does. Water doesn't behave like railroad tracks does. So canals are actually quite hard because of how you have to engineer them. Let's not say hard, but they're precise. Railroad tracks, too, are precise, and they have to be built up because they can't get flooded. You don't want them flooded, so they have to be built up. You can't put railroads are very difficult. Like canals, you have to be very careful about railroads. You don't want them on too much of a pitch because trains have trouble going uphill, a lot of trouble. You want to try to keep them good and straight, like not just straight in pitch, but, straight going. And it takes time to put down tracks. Especially, it takes time to put down tracks if their story is true and they did most of these by hand. So they invested all this time putting in all of these railroad tracks in Indiana, and there's shit tons of railroad tracks in Northwest Indiana. Northwest Indiana was absolutely, to one degree or another, a very central sort of hub in shipping. It is to this day. If you go out, you look at the roads, okay? So when you get up north here, all of these roads you see tying in near the lake, and even down to Valparaiso, these are major roads running east to west, and there are some very major roads running north to south as well. Okay? I don't know if the license plates in Indiana still say this, but forever the license plate said Indiana Crossroads of America. Very true. Crossroads of America. That would also apply to rail. There's huge rail yards up here in northwest Indiana and northeastern Illinois. Huge rail yards. A lot of business being done. So then you got to kind of wonder, well, wait a second. I mean, we could probably just track these old tracks out to wherever they went and whatnot. You start to wonder, what? So they stopped using all these railroad tracks, lots of them. You're telling me that they stopped using all of these in under a century, and they spent all the time and money putting in all the trestle bridges that they had to put in. They spent all the time and money engineering all these tracks and using all the materials that it takes for train tracks. Man, the materials. The specific crushed stone. The stone, and I don't know exactly the kind of stone it is, but it is specifically for railroad tracks. It's a decent sized stone, 1 to 2 inches, roughly. Typically oval shaped, very craggy, rough feeling, because they're meant to lay down a good bed to be able to stack in a pretty good way for the track, and they lock together because of how rough and their size. You can't put pea gravel down and put sleepers on it. You have to use this kind of gravel. Then you can put the sleepers down. The sleepers have to be level. You got to make sure these sleepers are level on that gravel. And I mean, once you get them leveled out, that gravel creates a very good, strong, sturdy, solid bed. Then you can put the rails on those sleepers. And they're telling us they did all this by hand for these hundreds of miles. And then apparently sometime in less than a century, they decided that all of that investment of time and money and materials really just wasn't worth it anymore. And not only did they close the tracks down, they had the resources to go out and remove many of the sleepers, of course, many of the tracks, and in a lot of cases, a lot of that gravel. Weird. Or, it was overgrown with dirt. I wouldn't think so, because here's the thing. A lot of these runs, they're odd, because part of the run, you can tell that there's some grasses and probably dirt and whatnot that has really just grown over, because that stuff will just get in between this gravel if you don't maintain it. And it'll just start growing. Dirt blows around. Seeds blow around. They get in there and they start growing. And then you've got a mess. But eventually it'll just look like a mound. It'll still have all that gravel in it and just look like a mound and just get that grown over. But in some cases, you get these large, really long runs of this straight abandoned track area that you get these trees, lots of tree growth in. And if you got lots of tree growth and on a lot of these places that I zoomed in on, you got plenty of tree growth. Plenty of tree growth. That would be probably one reason why they never just joined those fields, because of the time and expense it would take to remove the mound, which probably still has all that gravel underneath the topsoil now. Sprouts managed to take root over time. Their root system sank in there, and now you have those tree root systems as well as all of this gravel and other soils and compacted things. And if they start digging into that, first off, it's going to take a lot of time and resources to remove all of that. But secondly, there's the question of how long have these actually really been abandoned? I'm sure there's some old-timers that remember some of these trains still working. Maybe. I'm telling you I don't. At all. And like I said, even where I grew up, I did bring this up last time, but just one more time. Even where I grew up, outside of Couts proper, is a few miles outside of Couts proper, off of a road called 1050. It was about 3/4 of a mile off of Route 49. This little stretch right here, over what they call Crooked Creek, had a very strong, large, iron trestle bridge on it before they came and took it out while we were still living there. Now, I've pulled back on this, and you can actually see a ghost in the land over here. You can see that. And that could be something. What I don't see is a ghost right here where that trestle bridge was. I see a little this way, but that would be a really sharp turn. And I see what looks like the, ghosts of a lot of ditches that might have been filled in. But unfortunately, I don't see what should be a tracks unless it turned right in this area, which would be, to me, that looks like quite a turn. So I am trying to tell you, that does not look like any road bridge, and you definitely don't need it to span this. This bridge right here, which I believe they left the bottom frame in, and they just took out all of that iron that was comprising a trestle bridge that looked like a railroad bridge. Maybe that's why they took it out. I don't think they needed to take it out. It wasn't a danger to anyone. There wasn't even that many people that lived near there. Why come out and take that damn thing out? That just required money and manpower and everything. Again, it was no danger to anyone. No, it was kind of fun because we could climb on it. 40 feet or so. But you figure from bank to bank, 30 feet. The trestles itself, 50, 60 feet across there. That's still not a huge span. It's not. There are old railroad bridges, abandoned bridges all over the place. We used to go swimming off them all the time because they're pretty high up off the water. On Crooked Creek, we'd find them and we'd drive through fields and stuff to get to them. And we'd jump in the creek from up on top of these bridges. Pretty stupid, but, didn't have much else to do. I just don't know why any railroad company would spend the kind of time, spend the kind of money, invest the kind of material resources into railroads, lots of railroads through these areas, just to not only shut them down, but to go through all the time and the work to remove huge miles and miles and miles and miles and miles and miles of it. And I will tell you, I don't remember any crews actually doing that. I just don't remember seeing them. I'm not saying I'm the all-knowing, all-seeing. I don't remember. I don't remember seeing any. I remember these places being basically old, abandoned, and overgrown since I was very young. And then there's the idea of the Kankakee. Now, I believe I believe I read this in the little wiki that I read last time. Is they said it was just way too unruly, the way that it zigzagged through the land like a river's supposed to. Even over flat land. Even over flat land, it's really flat in here, and this river just goes everywhere. So they said that they had to straighten it and dredge it, okay? And it is, you can see, it's like a giant canal. It's a very big, the dredging that they did here, okay? Huge, giant channel. Well, if you'll remember in the wiki, it said that this whole area, it would flood. This is why they call it Kankakee Valley. This whole area they call the Kankakee Valley in Indiana, because it's low land, and it's pretty big. And what would happen is this whole channel would flood a really huge area. And they said what it would do is it would flood this really huge area. See, that's only a mile. That little line I put on there. They said it would flood a huge area of about 2 to 4.5 miles wide. That's how big an area this thing had flood. And they said the waters were anywhere from 1 to 4 feet deep, they say. Now the channel, the Kankakee that was there even when I lived there, wasn't that deep. I'm just saying it wasn't very, very deep. So that line that I just drew on there, that's around 4 miles, okay? And that's running perpendicular to one section of the channel, okay? This is big, right? Okay, well, if they said that it would have that area somewhat flooded, the Kankakee would flood that area about 8 months out of the year, about 3/4 of the year. So I'm wondering how they dug that gigantic channel from just southwest of South Bend, Indiana. Not, you know, because it follows the wind of the original Kankakee Path for 100 or so miles. Wide channel. On average, this channel here, I believe I measured it last time, and its average, what was it? It was about 80 feet. Let me just switch back to feet. Would you please... Oh, come on. Never wants to work with me here. Could we start now, please? Okay. No, my bad. About 150 feet wide. 150 feet wide. Put that into perspective. The Edmund Fitzgerald was about, what was it, about 75 feet wide? Yeah. It's a big channel. Now, when you dig a channel or a ditch, you want to dig it to where the last thing that you do is tie it in with the existing water, because, of course, the water is going to rush in there. You wouldn't want to tie it in with the existing water right away and then dig. It'd just be a big mess. But they say 8 months out of the year, for about 2.5 to 4.5 miles, it was 1 to 4 feet of water. That must have been quite a challenge to dig this in the middle of the river's path. With steam technology, I suppose. Oh, I don't know what tools they used to dig a channel 150 feet wide for 100 miles or so. It was paid for by local patrons. So the funny thing is, I can point out all of these oddities, and they are oddities. You see all of these straight lines everywhere, somebody dug them. I don't care how wide they are. I don't care if they call it a creek. I don't care if they call it a river. I don't give a fuck what they call it. That's dug by man. Water digs a different path. And you get to the official stories. When was this town founded? 1800s, right? That's our historical catch-all, 1800s. Yeah, so much infrastructure that exists. That's remarkable. But at the same time, I have seen virtually no alternative history channels that actually take the time to really dig into all of the specifics, the logistics, the numbers, the math, the engineering that it would take to do certain things. So I'm not going to tell you absolutely anything except here's these signs, nothing smells right. Try this in your own backyard and see if that smells right either. So these alt history gurus are doing nothing more for anyone than typically leading you down very simplistic, often emotional path, a bestial path, to keep you in the mindset where they want you, of that wild animal who will chew its leg off to get out of the trap. The simplest, fastest, non-thinking, long... I'm glad I had dogs that were smart enough to where they would dig up the stake in the trap instead of their leg, because of course that might kill them. But that's the headspace these turds are intending to keep people in. I know the alternate headspace is a lot longer and more difficult. It is. It sucks. It super sucks. Because the answers don't come right away. The answers don't come in the 1 minute it takes to look at a photograph, or the 5 minutes maybe it takes to read the accompanying text to a photograph in a Facebook group. Real answers take a lot longer. Why? Because we've fallen so far. Because we're so de-educated. Same people keeping you in that base, animalistic, emotional mindset. They're the same people who started it. They're continuing it. And they want you to stay there, probably until they do a hell of a lot of soft killing. I don't know how much hard killing they're going to do, because that could be problems. That could cause some serious problems. Unless they design things to where, as long as you're not looking at them, when, the hard killing starts. Same people, same mentality. So I guess in that sense, I don't know what else Herbert's work might be good for, or Dune might be good for. I've thought a lot about it. But that illustration certainly, I think, is very, it's very insightful into the way that these people think. Because they see themselves as far more advanced, maybe far more evolved, capable of keeping their hand in the box. Maybe that's what kind of people they are. And I'm sure they have their justifications for the way that they do things, one way or another. I don't care what they are. I do, but I don't. But I'm sure they have them. So, I'll wrap it up. We're over an hour. And I'll just see you on the next one.